Welcome to the Burn Bootcamp podcast. I'm your host, Morgan Klein, co-founder and CEO, along with my husband and company visionary, Devin Klein.
And together, with our amazing team, we are going to help you push past your limits, not just physically in our gyms, but right here, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually on the Burn Bootcamp podcast.
Together, we will take on challenges and break through barriers to transform into the best possible version of ourselves. We are more than a gym. We are a community. Your community. Let's go, Burn Nation.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Burn Bootcamp podcast. My name is DK. As our followers, our members already know, if you're new to the podcast, that stands for Devin Klein, and I'm the co-founder and visionary, along with my wife, Morgan, who is the CEO, and we co-host the podcast together. And it's my privilege to bring to you an extremely brilliant and articulate woman. I got a chance to, the team cobbled together all of the interesting and vast amount of information we could find on Dr. Kristen Lee. And then I watched her TED Talk on repeat because not only was I learning something, I also wanted to bring you guys an opportunity to really get inside of her head and break down what she knows. So Dr. Kristen Lee goes by Dr. Chris, so everybody knows. All right, we're informal here, although we're serious. Is a renowned behavioral science clinician, by the way, which is very important, a practitioner, a researcher, educator, speaker, and comedian, which is an interesting combination from Boston, Massachusetts. That definitely plays through in your TED Talk. I was laughing the whole time. Very well done. And as a behavioral science at the behavioral science faculty, as a part of that team at Northeastern University, Dr. Chris's research and teachings, her interests include individual and organizational well-being, and keyword, resilience. Okay, we talk about resiliency, individual resiliency, so much on this podcast, and you have a shining star in the field of human resiliency here with you today, particularly for marginalized and underserved populations that nobody focuses on. Okay, we need to make sure that community isn't just part of the community; it's the whole community. Everybody is as important as the next person, and so I'm excited because she's she is an author, a fellow author. You guys have read my book, Stop Starting Over, Morgan and I's collab, Burn, the new book that just dropped. And I believe you have a new book coming out very, very soon, do you not?
I do.
Yes, you do. Okay, we're gonna dive into that. Set to come out in 2025. Clean slate, how to make change happen. So after that, you guys got to get on the pre-order for her book. And listen to her TED Talk. So this is just your intro. I'm going to be quiet now because I want to make sure that you get your opportunity to lay down your knowledge in school, Burn Nation, on really human resiliency. So Dr. Chris, we're so excited to have you on the Burn Bootcamp podcast with us today. And my first question for you is, what is human resiliency?
I love it. Your intro game is like legit good.
I did good. Okay.
I'm blushing over here.
We're working on it.
And to be part of this incredible community that you and Morgan have created is an honor. And the question you're asking is one that I get all the time. What is resilience? And is it even a thing in today's times? So by definition, what we know is that resilience is actually a process. And you notice I really emphasize the word process because in years ago, we used to think of it as something you're born with or you're not. Now we understand that resilience is a process that every single one of us can engage with in order to cultivate it. And it's that ability to adapt in the face of suffering, hardship, trauma, work dynamics, relationship circuses, all the things in order to stay and do well. So it's our ability to adapt, and it is well documented. But it's not like a flip of switch thing. It's not a 1, 2, 3 step pop psychology thing. It's something that we have to understand at a deeper level so that we can make strides towards our own resilience. And we all know, all of your community here knows, it's not just for yourself, but it's for your family members. It's for people at work. It's It's all the ways in which we want to show up with as much resilience as we can to help spread that positive contagion.
And so what I hear you saying is we used to think that being a resilient person was an inherent personality trait, but what we found is you can actually like train yourself to be resilient, and you call that process, right? And so your clinical work, I would assume, has then been the execution of this process with people over and over. Am I correct in saying that? Or in the process, is it your process? Is it the process? Is it agreed upon universally by behavioral scientists and clinicians? Or is it more tailored to individuals and not quite such a science?
It's a great question. I think one of the things we can all reflect on in our own lives when we think about this like big ball of wax of resilience and like how do we like activate this process, it really relies on what we call protective factors. So protective factors are the presence of caring people in our lives, activities, resources, our strengths. It could be our own creativity or a sense of humor, right? So it's all of those things that we can leverage in order to stay and do well. So with your question around therapy, like if you were a fly in the wall in my therapy room, you would see that common thread of humanity. Like we're all taking turns suffering. I like to kind of shy away from that old school 1950s hangover definition, mental health condition, and really move to human condition. Like we all have a lot to contend with, a lot to grapple with, but we all have protective factors in our life that we can fortify and nurture. And so the therapeutic relationship, I think, is interesting because, and you're going to laugh because I feel like, especially with men, when they've come in to see me for therapy, I think they're like, hey, this wasn't like I thought it was going to be on TV. And I'm like, well, like what actually is, first of all.
Right.
But I think they were like relieved that they weren't like sitting in a hot seat being judged. They actually had someone that has the skills. One of I think the most important skills that a clinician has is what we call a non-judgmental stance. And we understand human behavior occurs within context. And so like, let's say, for example, like someone's like, you know what, I'm super anxious, and they're really embarrassed about being super anxious. But then it's like they're working 2 jobs, like they're barely getting any sleep. Maybe like their support system has eroded, or like things at work are a hot mess. So I think that a lot of people carry a lot of shame. And when they finally, I think, break that ice and come into therapy, it's this big sigh of relief. Like, okay, they're not judging me. They want to look at my strengths. They want to help me find my protective factors and get some stuff off my chest that has like inhibited me to living more fully and with less regret and less risk aversion. I think that's a key piece of resilience is it emboldens, if we think about this process, we got to be willing to get comfortable with the uncomfortable in order to make progress.
Yeah, no, I love that. And what I picked up on something, and I want to get your opinion on this because you had a moment there where you used the term, I am X, I am sad, I am anxious, you said. And how much of the actual therapy or process is just self-identifying the language patterns we're using? And, do we or do we not put ourselves in this box of like, I am fat. Let's just use a fitness context. People use that kind of negative self-talk all the time, right? I think what they mean is what they're saying, right? So what's more powerful, the actual words or the intention behind the words? They're saying, I am fat when they're in their own head, or they look at themselves and have negative emotion associated with that, right? And that's the way they language it. Do they really mean that I am not worthy of or I am maybe have fat and I'm not actually that thing? Like, hopefully I'm being clear, but how powerful is language when it comes to defining yourself, and what part of the process in resiliency is language patterns and self-talk?
It's everything. And really, like, your question, I think, honors what we know from the research about the effectiveness of cognitive behavioral treatment, because cognitive behavioral treatment helps us poke at our automations, of thought that are like really kind of inhumane to ourselves, right? Like that toxic inner critic, or like one of the distortions is labeling ourselves. So like you said, I am fat, or I'm stupid, or I'm never going to amount to anything. And so, all of us, like, we don't necessarily have to be in therapy to, really like benefit from this knowledge around how powerful it is to monitor our inner chatter, how powerful it is to reframe those automations, and to know that, like, the other, I think, really cool discovery as of late is we're not at the mercy of our emotions. Like, we don't have to fly by the seat of our emotional pants. And so one of my colleagues at Northeastern really championed this idea. Her name is Lisa Feldman Barrett. And she talks about a couple concepts related to your question. One is called emotional granularity. And I like it. Like, it's got that whole
Yeah, it's
vibe.
nice.
Don't you love that
that's
term?
a nice term.
I know the audience will be like, wait, I got to pull over. I'm going to write that one down.
No, they love their terms. We love all the
Yeah.
terms. We like to go on the rabbit hole research
I know.
after these podcasts.
Well, you tapped me for the right reason, because
Okay,
I'm super
good.
nerdy about it too. So emotional granularity is the ability to name precisely our emotions and not shy away from, like, if we feel badly, like, let's take your example when you said I am fat. If you feel badly that you're not in the shape you want to be in, to describe it further would be an example of emotional granularity. So I am disappointed in myself that I'm extremely overweight right now, or I would really like to see myself advance in my fitness goals and not be stuck in this mire of cognitive dissonance, which is another fun psychology term, which basically means we have an intention, but we have struggle following through. And it's that, like, that frustrating sense of disappointment, self-disappointment. The other thing that I want to mention in this realm is that we know our brains really rely on our body budget. And I know this is really important for your community here, because
So emotional granularity, and then you're going to go into body budget. These were the things. Okay.
Body budget is how well rested we are, how hydrated, well exercised, how much time in nature, but how well we're tending to ourselves. And what modern brain science has really revealed, it's like such 101 stuff, but like it's so easy to skip over it, is if we are constantly like in the deficit in terms of the way we're taking care of ourselves, nourishing ourselves, trying to sustain ourselves, then, the more at risk we are to having really intense emotions that aren't helpful. And our brains will actually almost go, I always think of the song by Norah Jones, like, I'm feeling the same way all over again. It's like that same thing. Like, the brain is a predictive machine, and it's going to already guess how you feel based on that body budget. And I think those two pieces, because then think of how language, like your original question, like, that all is like a pretty, difficult thing to sort out if we're not mindful. And again, it's all about like giving ourselves the greatest advantage that we can. So when that self-talk comes in, we have healthy rebuttals for it. We have a way of naming our difficulty. We don't have to pretend everything's fine. And we also don't have to be like, well, therefore I'm the jerk, or therefore nothing's ever going to go my way again. And like stew in that anxiety that is like super, horrible for any of us to have to live with.
Yeah, no, anxiety is horrible. Definitely, especially when there's an immense amount of it. Early on in my entrepreneurial career, I would have just like kind of the imposter syndrome things that you talked about, because we were successful pretty quickly. And so I resonate with that. I think emotional granularity is such an important term for us to remember, because also what another term for that would be emotional intelligence, right? And like being able to not just label, the big five emotions like happy, sad, right? Anger, I guess disgust and fear probably,
Joy,
or like happy. Yeah. So it's being able to, what you're saying is expand your vocabulary. Being emotional granularity is to not label everything that you are scared of fear. Fear might be have a positive energy and a negative energy to it. There might be an excitement that I might be fearful because I'm excited, Or I might, right? Because like I'm fearing like jumping out of a plane, but I really want to jump out of the plane, but I also fear it. Or I feel fear that I'll lose friends and family if, I am overcome with guilt or shame for whatever moral or ethical reason. Am I getting that right? Am I, you're saying it a much better package, but I want to make sure that I'm getting it right. That emotional granularity is the expansion of your vocabulary and how to then express your emotions to yourself and other people. And inherently that is emotional intelligence, just understanding your emotions more.
And you're spot on. And I think the key thing is coupling that with a hearty dose of self-compassion, like recognizing as human, the human condition is kind of fraught. And like we all, again, have a lot of different emotions and experiences and a lot of stressors in our lives. And I think when we can remove ourselves from like feeling like we just have to pretend everything's okay when it's not, or we have to like succumb to the dark emotions that we experience as humans, we can kind of miss the opportunity to your word, become more expansive in our repertoire of thinking and responding to these inevitable aspects of our lives.
I have an interesting question for you. It's one that is kind of spur of the moment here. But you said something interesting. You said self-compassion. And my question for you is, maybe you can help us identify where self-compassion can go wrong. Because there's pros and cons to everything. And the meta narrative is more self-compassion, more positivity, more optimism. Speak to yourself like you are the valued, cherished child of God, like you are. We understand that, I think. So I'm not debating whether or not that's true. Because I thoroughly believe that. But I think in order to really be intelligent about anything, you need to understand both the light and the dark side, because there is two sides to every coin. For the classic example I use is, everybody talks about like, water, for example, being like something that's so pure and necessary for human existence. Yeah, but there's also such thing as water toxicity, where you can literally internally drown and it's very rare, but it's possible. So too much of literally anything, too alkaline, too acidic, that's why the pH balance is kind of neutral, right? Because if you go too far either way in the spectrum, you're dead, whether it's alkalinity or acidity. So with all that context, where can too much self-compassion go wrong?
I think it's just such a provocative question that I love. And I will say that I think we're in alignment, because what I'm hearing is like, there's so much like hashtag self-love, hashtag like, just treat yourself with like all the kindness and all the gentleness and so forth. And I think what we know from a research standpoint is I think that speaks to the overachiever. So I want to speak to two different like sides of the spectrum, right?
Right.
So on one hand, what we know is in the last decade, perfectionism has escalated by 33%. We know social comparison is the driving force. We know that social anxiety is the fastest growing anxiety spectrum disorder. So for the person who like is always pedal to the metal, like always doing the most, but they never feel like it's enough. So you asked me for a new acronym. I got one for you. Ready for it?
Yeah, let's go. Yep.
All right. It's called UD, UDD, not UGS, UD. And what it stands for is underperformance dysmorphic disorder. All right. And so I write about this in Worth the Risk. So it's this whole idea that people who do the most feel underaccomplished. They feel like they're not doing enough, right? So self-compassion can help that kind of prototype who's the classic overfunctioner, who classically like looks at themselves and it's just not enough. And what I see in my practice life is I see a lot of high octane people feel this way. I see a lot of parents feel this way. There's actually an interesting study that talks about how parents of today spend the most time with their kids of any generation prior, and yet they experience the most guilt of any generation, right? And so that whole thing, that dysmorphia of like looking at ourselves with this like cruel lens, I think was what created the other side of it, we might call it the coddling side, or the way too woo-woo, touchy-feely, just do you. You don't have to take any initiative or agency, and all you have to do is breathe today. Like, that kind of stuff.
And if you like feel bad, then just go on a shopping spree and go treat
Yeah.
yourself and do all
Yeah.
these like surface level things. And you're saying that's not the answer. It's deeper than that.
It's superficial. It's so superficial. I feel like it's like very touted. I call it the TikTokification of society. We know 86% of what we see on TikTok is either erroneous or harmful. So all this feel good stuff can end up making us feel bad. And so to color that in, I would say this. I would say that self-compassion is important for all of us. We don't want to beat ourselves up incessantly. And like what we know from a behavior change standpoint is rubbing our nose in our own messes, constantly shaming and being punitive with ourselves isn't helpful. But way too much self-reinforcement or self-love or self-absorption can also like really miss the mark. So I would just encourage everyone in this, incredible community to think strategically about where you stand with that. Like if you're that person who really gives and you're really optimizing your talent and you're really putting yourself out there, you might need to like be a little gentler. But if you're a person, like I know for myself, even I'm a pretty sensitive person. People might not know that about me. They see my letters after my name or like, the things I talk about, which, by the way, we all know like what, that I'm a human resilience researcher and a clinician. We study what we need to learn. So, and like you were revealing before, like when you started off your very successful career, you were like probably biting your nails just as much as the next person. And you had to kind of, again, integrate that discomfort into your life. And that's really why I wrote Worth the Risk too, because I don't necessarily consider myself this like person who would jump unabashedly out of a plane or bet it all at the Bellagio. I'm like kind of conflict averse and like, I don't want to create more anxiety because I'm already a person that has a lived experience with anxiety. And I remember early in my career too, because, I speak to companies around the world. I work with schools and I work with leaders and just like teachers and people really doing incredible things in the world that need support. And they're the type that tend to not have a lot of self-compassion. And I feel like they're probably just like, you just seem so natural with all this, or it just seems easy. And, by watching my TED Talk, I do the big reveal around my own lived experience. And I remember like early on, I'm like, why do I do this to myself? Like, why am I putting myself in adrenal overload? Like, this is ridiculous. Like, I should just like stay at this plateau, or I should just like back off a little bit. Like I'm constantly biting off more than I can chew. But then I realized that like by doing that, it helped me build my skills and competencies, and it helped me take my talent and contribute it in the world. And by the way, just as a footnote for everyone, I think a lot of us, you also know I study and I do a lot of work on burnout. A lot of people think that burnout is because of overwork, but burnout also comes with understimulation and not aligning our talents to what we can do. So a lot of people find that in their job situations, it's so underwhelming. No one recognizes their strengths. They don't give them opportunities. Like they don't listen to their ideas. So I feel like we all have to watch for that and be willing to take these strategic risks in order to be able to get that gumption built. Like it happens a little bit at a time. But if we constantly, if someone uses self-compassion as a shield to like hunker down and not face life, I think it behooves them to think a little bit differently about that.
Yeah. And I think that you're so articulate right there. Like that is a perfect way for me to at least understand what we're dealing with. Because it seems to be the case that there's a tendency to expect the world around you to change rather than changing from the inside out yourself. Mm-hmm. And you could call that maybe an entitlement. But I mean, do you see that being as hyped of a problem as it is? I mean, clearly you study it deeply and you've got access to all of your own clinical data, but also I'm sure access to data that we don't have. I mean, it's hyped in the media, right? Like, is the hype of authenticity and the hype of mental health, does it match the problem? Is it not talked about enough? Like, where are we at? How are we doing? I guess is a better way to put this from your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, like everything that we study, we look at is nuanced. And one big issue in psychology research is that a lot of it is weird. And that's another acronym for everyone. So weird stands for Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic nation. Okay. And so sometimes we only study phenomena. Like another way to put that is like 18 to 22-year-old college students who are likely to be like more affluent and oftentimes predominantly white. So we sometimes like will overgeneralize the human condition. So that's one thing to be aware of when we look at research or we see things coming through our feed. You know, I often like to say that that sloppy thinking is a public health issue. You know, there's so much coming at us, and it's hard to sometimes know, you know, does this have merit? Is it valid? So to look at your question specifically, like, well, what's with this whole like reporting of mental health crisis? You know, we see it being declared on campuses. We see it being declared among youth. We see all kinds of stuff happening in the workforce, you know, and so it's something that I think, you know, we have to say like, what's happening, right? And one way to think about it, and I think this is what we were starting to kind of think about when you use the word entitlement earlier, is looking at things from a generational and historical perspective. Because I think I do worry sometimes that in today's times, especially with the group contagion spreading so rapidly and wildly, that we lose perspective in terms of suffering within the annals of human history. And so sometimes we think, oh, this is the worst it's ever been, or these are unprecedented times. And we see this kind of like notion being repeatedly reinforced. So on one hand, I think we have to recognize that there's always been polarization. There's always been threats to our humanity. There's always been peril. And yet at the same time, we do face very unique peril at the present moment. And some of the suffering can come with our perception around what's occurring. Now, having said that, what we do know is occurring is, and one of my favorite, if anyone wants to look, one of my favorite references is called Our World in Data. And I wrote about it in my second book, Mentelligence. And I kind of became obsessed with it because I wrote this chapter called Unfriending Chicken Little.
Okay.
And it was really just about like recognizing the kinds of advances that we have made, but not minimizing or belittling the severe systemic issues at hand. So see, like, I think society sometimes wants to be like, it's all this way, or I'm on this political affiliation, I'm on this, and this is how I think. But I think we have to get to a place where we can appreciate that the marker of like a good line of questioning is turning up with more questions than answers, right? And in a lot of ways, we have advantages and privileges that no one's ever had before. And yet those privileges sometimes also, you know, have unintended consequences. So the last thing I want to say about this piece with mental health, or just for this moment, is the World Health Organization actually declared burnout as a condition of modern life and of the modern workforce. And this was in 2019 before the pandemic. And they also have a statement that I think is really compelling, which is this: there's no health without mental health. And they've been projecting a critical shortage of mental health workers to crest in 2030 before the pandemic slammed us all. So I feel like, I think what we're seeing is more people, speaking of getting comfortable with the uncomfortable, we're seeing people be more candid and open about their lived experiences. They are realizing that we're all in the same boat. You know, when I give talks, you can imagine I get swarmed after. People tell me, you wouldn't believe what's going on with my kid. They, you know, they're engaging in self-injurious behavior, or like people are just going through so much behind the scenes in their lives. And I'm really privy to that because of the work that I do. And I think we just have to reckon with the fact that things are really challenging. But having said that, there's a lot we can tap into that prior generations didn't have. And there's a lot that we can do, we can take agency with to make real change happen in our lives, not only as individuals, but collectively to really generate collective efficacy. So almost like moving from me to we. But I think we have to, it's hard within the brouhaha, it's hard within the polarization sometimes to like get that little whiff of fresh air and say, there could be a different possibility here, because it's become so contentious. A lot of people are having trouble in their families of origin, their communities of origin. There's just like a lot of difficulty, and it can be hard then to see straight and to recognize that if we could see what we can optimize, we could make a lot more collective progress.
Yeah, and the title's beautiful because it's a funny, articulate, catchy way, unfriend Chicken Little. It's like, well, the people that say the sky is falling all the time, and you don't look elsewhere intentionally to get that alternate perspective, then, you're only going to have this one perspective, and the propensity to actually believe in that, right? Like your environment shapes you, right? I think that's called epigenetics. If I'm correct? That how the environment shapes you. And if your feed is your environment, I even see myself, like I'm a pretty kind of neutral, we're in the political era right now, right? Every 4-year cycle. I'm right in the middle. I'm a very independent thinker. I think most entrepreneurs who are real entrepreneurs before they get billions of dollars and get into the game, right? It's because you are a critical judgment of the information given to you at any given moment, right? And you look at that body of information to make the best decision for the greater good of the company if you're a good entrepreneur. And, so it's, how would I spin this into my next question? So what you're saying is that one of the most important things that we can do essentially is have a more holistic perspective of the things that are around us, and that has to start before societal awareness. It has to start with self-awareness. And my question for you is, and this will be rounding out self-compassion as well, because I think we hadn't gone all the way around. We're almost there. This is my last piece. I run in a circle with my franchise partners. They're my friends. They're my family. We're a group of 200 high-performing go-getters that we are that ultra group that you're talking about. Hey, maybe probably need some self-compassion. And although I see a lot of them, I think I'm included in this bucket, running without much of that at all, and or at least the awareness to having it at all. And my question for you is self-compassion a universal human need, or is it relative to the value hierarchy of an individual?
I think it's a fantastic question. I would say this, that I think we all have different variables in our lives, and we all have different propensities for achievement, how we choose to live out our value set. So I think that it especially applies to those of us who don't always know our threshold, and that have a hard time with our internal monologue, being really destructive. And that can be very counterproductive to us living a life, carrying out our legacy, living a life that matters to us. I think that one of my favorite ways to think about self-compassion connects with another concept called living a psychologically rich life. And that's something that's really emerging. There's a paper written by Oshie and his colleagues, and it talks about when they were actually studying regret in life and the different kinds of regrets people experience. And this is obviously connected to Daniel Pink's work as well. But they really looked at people later in life, and those people who were okay, I didn't live a perfect mistake-free life. Things were pretty rocky. I have different regrets, but that allowed me to grow. It allowed me to live a richer life because I wasn't just so afraid to try anything or to take those chances. And even though maybe there were challenges that really, they wouldn't change it. And I found that to be, a really good, I think, footnote to all the body of work that's been done on self-compassion. Because again, we know that compassion, even just not even to oneself, but in general, is a very universally important aspect of living and connecting and developing empathy and helping a society to flourish. But I think this notion of psychological richness, I think it offers us a lot because there's so much happiness chasing and, okay, how do we make sense of these things that you can't make sense around? But psychological richness, I think, embraces a life of taking chances. It embraces messiness, that life is not linear, that we have a lot of hard falls and massive redos, that we're always upgrading our knowledge, that we put our foot in our mouth sometimes, that, it's part of the human experience. And I found that to be a really pivotal new discovery, and something I think this community can think about in their own lives, because I feel like we narrowly measure success in our world. How many likes are on your feed, how much money's in the bank, letters after your name. I feel like a kid hasn't even lost their first tooth and they're already supposed to know which top tier college they're going to. And by the time they're in their third grade, they should already be reading 3 grade levels ahead. And by the time they're in high school, they should be taking 17 co-curriculars. And by the time you're 20, if you don't have your own nonprofit or startup, you're a failure. So I feel like society baits us into thinking, I think the key thing is if you form your identity around these things, that's a slippery slope, because it's a house of cards. Businesses crumble, people flake, people divorce, people die, pandemics strike, wars erupt, the one we didn't want to get elected gets elected. We can't base certain things on, the comforts we think we can create in our identity. They're built around this highfalutin kind of success or alleged perfection, because it's not a thing. It's not lasting. And we can sustain a healthier life when we redirect our attention to the richness of the mistakes and the challenges, and that everything wasn't okay, but we still hung in there as best as we could.
So I have one more fork in the road on this, and I want to get your opinion on it, because I really want myself to and everybody else to really be clear, because what I hear you saying is self-compassion inherently isn't a universal human need, but it is the need, not experiencing the need for it or experiencing too much of it is a sign, right? Either way, that if you're don't feel the need to experience self-compassion and you're one of those individuals, the need to not feel that means that you're potentially not psychologically living a rich life, because you're playing it safe and you're not making mistakes. And when you don't make mistakes, then there isn't as much need to have self-compassion, because there's nothing to feel guiltful and shameful about. I think that's one of it. And then the other fork in the road is, and I think you're saying this, is it also can be a sign that you're disassociated from your ego, and your ego or your identity isn't inherently based on the business or the start or whatever it is. And so you don't have that embodiment of the material. Therefore, you're able to see the ego as part of maybe the business identity, but not you as a human. And therefore, self-compassion is like a moderate experience if you're in either one of those two situations. That's what I heard you say. You said so many smart things. I was trying to keep up. And then I'm like, all right, I can't end it here. I have to ask one more question. So where am I wrong?
I love it. No, I think that you're connecting a lot of important dots. And I think that we know that it's a huge construct to try to unpack. And then all of our life experiences and circumstances are vastly different too. So I think the key is, when we think about resilience or self-compassion, we have to recognize there's not a one-size-fits-all formula of application. But if we understand what it is and where we might have some gaps in our behavior or knowledge, it can help us. So to color it in and to come back to your contemplation is think of self-compassion as being a good buddy to yourself in moments when you're struggling to reason well, or to look at things in a more humane way. So let's say, for example, you're well, you know what? I don't wrestle with these aspects of it, but I do tend to really personalize things, or I do tend to overgeneralize, or I disqualify the positive, whatever the distortion is. maybe you only need it in that one situation, but you don't need to like, it's not like a gaping need in your life. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I would definitely be in the camp of disqualifying the positive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because 5 years ago, I had an expectation mentally and visually to achieve what we set out to achieve, right? And so the celebration in my head happened long ago, and oftentimes we'll get to that milestone. I'll do something personally, like, like doing 200 workouts in a year is a big deal for like most every human. And I don't stop to celebrate that because it's like, that's just what I do now.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
And
okay.
That can lead to a perpetual sense of under accomplishment. It goes back to the underperformance dysmorphic disorder. That's right? And it's like, I do the same thing. Like I average like 20,000 steps a day, and then I'll get like 15 and I'll be like, oh, it was like, and I'm like, this is just like, just stop, So sometimes we just have to call ourselves out a little bit. Or also like, I think it's good to be ambitious. Like it's okay to sometimes like disappoint ourselves if we're not, like I think that it can serve as a motivating force, but I think we just have to like, keep an eye on it, monitor it so that it's not like overwhelming us.
There's like a line of intuition in which I hear you saying that's not so sciencey. It's more energy, like the energy that you're feeling. Okay. So thank you for sparring with me back and forth on that. I thought that was really informative. Going back to your TED Talk, you have a quote that I thought was really interesting, and also probably an underpinning of your study in resiliency. And the quote was, "Separate the person from the problem."
Mm-hmm.
Unpack that for us. What does that mean? Where do we go right? Where do we go wrong?
Gosh, I feel like that's almost like the mantra that I could use to summarize all of my life's work. I worry so much, especially, we talked a little bit about contentious times and maybe even cancel culture, or like trying to make sense of human behavior and being judgmental of each other and even ourselves perhaps. And it's like, we have to realize like we're fraught creatures. Like we're pretty wondrous creatures on one hand, we're capable of a lot. It's pretty amazing to marvel at us as a species. And yet like we all have our quirks and our idiosyncrasies and our inconsistencies and our glaring biases and problems to work out. And so I think it's really important when we look at ourselves and one another that we're not just constantly on that high horse of judgment or, just berating or punishing. What we know from a human behavior standpoint that behavior is complex, but that people can change and that they can make improvements. And that whole statement came out of a lot of my early clinical training. And I had this supervisor that was like really judgy. And I'm like, wait, like, why are you in this work of helping people if you're so judgy? I was like, didn't she read What Color Is Your Parachute? Like what? And we see that sometimes with teachers that yell at their kids or, and you're like, why are you so judgy? And I think that's key. That's a key point, is like recognizing we are not, our problems. We are not our issues. We're not our mood. We're not our raw emotions. We're so much more. We're so much more multidimensional. And I think we have to see ourselves and one another in that light in order then to be able to actually leverage our protective factors and leverage the goodness we all have, rather than lamenting over, just every little nook and cranny that isn't aligned with how we want to be yet. We're all works in progress.
For sure. Yeah, that's beautifully put. And through your work at Northeastern University, through your time at Boston University, Worcester State, I mean, you have really been exposed to through, especially I love your thesis of, it was focused on like urban classrooms, I believe. Just that you've dedicated your life to figuring this out. You're the best person to ask this question that I know of. Burn Boot Camp is a very challenging workout, right? Like our members, we show up on industry best. We're showing up 4 times a week on average. It's the home gym, right? That's 3 days of conditioning, 3 days of strength training, designed to be 6 days a week, and then designed with a rest day. At least one rest day is a mandatory for Burn. And it's nothing easy, right? And it's designed that way. The logo is the organizational, just the how do you say, the appearance of the gym. Everything is designed intentionally to, and I know this sounds funny, but I want to get your take on it. It's designed intentionally to create that little sense of doubt of, can I do this? Right? Can I? And through the act of believing in yourself and actually going to do it, you prove to yourself how strong you are once. You repeat that over and over and over, and every workout's a moment, and this moment, each moment every day becomes momentum, right? So you get momentum in doing this really challenging thing that's designed to be challenging. It's upfront, in your face, challenging. And people come in, and it's incredible to watch their growth. It's incredible to see them step in front of these workouts, and it's them versus the workout, and there's doubts in their head, and they just crush it, right? They just go after it. We're very focused on personal records, PRs. It's all about what you can gain rather than what you need to lose or the deficit you need to be in. And we're about building strong women and strong families and strong communities. And so knowing all that about the brand, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on what's happening mentally from a resilience perspective. What's going on subconsciously under the radar when we physically are stepping up to these things that we're nervous about, anxious about, whatever. We need to expand our vocabulary and learn exactly what our feeling is around it. But there's a sense of fear, let's say, around doing something like this. What is happening mentally to us when we step into Burn Boot Camp and we crush that workout, especially the one we didn't want to do in the first place?
I just think your community is so remarkable, and everything that you've created with Morgan is just, it's awesome, because I think it's such a metaphor for everything that we are capable of, right? And so I think, to answer your question around the fear, when we face that fear and we prove to ourselves that we could do more than what we anticipated, it's really gratifying. It's really, really gratifying. There's a high level of reward in that circumstance, to put yourself out there. And obviously from
that's why we high five, Dr. Chris. That's why we're high fiving left and right, was celebrating in the moment.
I love it. Yeah. And I think obviously you're getting the endorphins and the dopamine rush, you're getting all the good chemicals that help us recalibrate our mind too. And what we know from resilience standpoint is that the mindsets that we endeavor are really important. So it's all connected, this is all, like you said, that holistic view. And if we're able to challenge ourselves in that sphere, then that can carry over into other aspects of our life that are challenging. Because we all have boot camp everywhere we turn. It's not just during the time we're tuning in. It's it could be you could be caring for aging parents, or you could have kids, or whatever your life variables are, relationships, there's a lot of turmoil to navigate. And so if we can, so in psychology, we call this a positive emotion repertoire. So this is another one. And my favorite way of putting it, it's also called an upward spiral. So we often think about the downward spiral, the negative, things are going to come crashing down. But we can when we create positive emotion repertoires, so that state when we have success, like you just described, when we have that state of presence and peace and high energy, or just joy or euphoria or elation, what happens is, outside of the boot camp, later in the day, when the rubber meets the road and something's challenging, your mind will have a frame of reference to go back to. And I think that's very powerful in your community, that you're creating that positive upward spiral, that positive emotion repertoire to come back to. And if we never create those states, we don't know what we don't know. And I think that's just a really phenomenal aspect, and a connection that we can all make, is realizing the multiplicity, the carryover and the transfer across the spheres of our lives. Now, does that mean everything's going to be picture perfect and easy? No, but we're building stamina, perseverance, grit, strength, agility, all the things that we need in today's life in order to flourish.
I love that. And I think, one thing that comes to mind as you're articulating yourself is this notion that failure in the gym is a good thing, right? This is another one of those metaphors, like this is the gift from fitness to the world, right? That failure in and workout is success. And part of your psychologically rich life comments were to fail, right? To make mistakes, to don't play it safe, like don't play not to lose, play to win. And in the gym is this this trainer, like it's this metaphor, but it's training you for failure outside of life. And when you are chasing the failure in the gym, it's almost intentional. So let's use that metaphor to go chase failure elsewhere. And, that forces us to adapt, and because we push it a little bit further than we were capable of. And the human body and the human mind is incredible at adaptation. And it's just so cool to hear you come at it from the other perspective, right? And give some words to what I think many of our members are aware of. But I think, correct me if I'm wrong and maybe speak on this, it is more, so neuroplasticity, right? So you're able to make new connections, and new neurons can wire and fire together in better ways faster if you're more aware about how you want it to be. So if I think about my mind to physical body connection, if I'm like, because, and I language this to myself, because I looked at the 45s, had doubt, picked up the 55s and crushed it, because I did that, I can also do that elsewhere. And I now know that because I believe in the metaphor. How much of that belief system do you think, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, we know that beliefs dictate our behavior, right? I mean, they're so crucial. So we constantly have to evaluate. I love, there's a quote by Alvin Toffler who said, "The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn." And so we constantly have to be like, okay, wait, I got to challenge myself here, or I got to discover something in a new way, or ask more questions. So I think all of it, the way in which we look at it is really, we know this because we experience it. And again, it's a process of discovery and reconfiguration when we need to. But these things can be like oil in the wheel. They can facilitate and, kind of coming back, think of the multiple benefits, right? First, it's folks belong to a community where the support is there, the encouragement. We know that's a protective factor. We know that physical engagement, exercise is important. It's important for our physical, our brain health. And to your point around neuroplasticity and just the ability to optimize our well-being, we know there are things that we can do that absolutely can, just be of benefit to our health. We're not meant to sit around and be dormant or sedentary. So I think it's all really critical, and I think we just have to choose progress over perfection. As much, I'm a runner, and I use that term loosely when I say I'm a runner. You missed the part of my bio where it's she can be found out on the running trails and attempting tricky yoga poses and drinking green juice and eating peanut butter.
I got to do better on the bio.
Not at all once. No, I'm teasing you.
I can't go off script anymore.
No, I'm such a dork. But it's I am the turtle out there running. It's funny. But I think I've made a lot of strides, pun intended, and just the ability to even, you mentioned my work in comedy, and, I'm a behavior science professor, I'm a comedian, and you're how does that fit together? But it does, because you have to bring that levity. We have to take life serious enough, but not so much that we eat ourselves alive, right? And I'm just okay, I'm really very competitive in my life. The most recent book that I have coming out, I accidentally wrote it. I'm such a dork. I was setting out to try to redo my first book, a 10-year anniversary. And then I was oh, this chapter is not good. I'll just cause it's supposed to only be 50% rewrite. I ended up rewriting a whole new book. And then I was people in my life are like, we didn't know you were writing a book. I was like, I didn't know either.
I didn't know either.
But I think you'll see that in my body of work is like, I bring a lot of levity through humor. I laugh at myself a lot. Like I totally make fun of myself, but it's because I think I've done the work of like not tethering myself to these like hard expectations or just like of perfectionism, or I've tried to make a little peace with my own underperformance dysmorphic disorder, also known as imposter syndrome, and it's like, it's good. It's like when we can like bring a little light and joy, a little levity, it can really help. So I encourage that too. We got to be creative. Be a little silly.
Yeah, for sure. And you are definitely a very fun person to talk to, and you walk that line of serious, informative conversation with levity, and that is your superpower in your delivery. And it's been a real joy getting the ability to talk to you. I could ask you questions for like hours on hours on hours. I'm a very curious person, and I think we just touched the tip of the iceberg in terms of all the things that are really table stakes to start to get some momentum for our lives mentally, specifically, from a resilience perspective, specifically through that lens of self-compassion and positivity and language patterns that are empowering as opposed to disempowering, or as opposed to indifferent, intentional language patterns. And we could go any which way, on that kind of highway of things. And hopefully we'll be able to do that in the future. But do you know when your book Clean Slate is set to launch? Right now I have a 2025 date. Are we dialed into when it's going to launch, and can we pre-order now?
All right. So here's the thing. You're the first one that I've revealed this to publicly. So this is yes. So it won't be on pre-order.
Can we do the bubble thing like iPhone?
Oh yeah, I think I always do that at the weirdest moment. So right now, the audience can order Worth the Risk: How to Microdose Bravery to Grow Resilience, Connect More, and Offer Yourself to the World. That's available. See my little nest necklace? I had a friend had someone make this for me, but if you look at the book cover, you'll know. Oh, it's all about leaving the nest and taking risks.
Okay,
and then
great.
Clean Slate is going to be available for pre-order January 1st, 2025, releasing on the first day of spring, because I talk about the fresh start effect and how we can make change happen. So, yeah.
Well, we'll give everybody time to go get Worth the Risk and take a read through it after listening to this. I'm sure they will. Or your TED Talk that you could just go to YouTube and type in all I did was Dr. Chris TED, and it came right up.
Yeah.
So it's viewed almost 500,000 times. 500,000 times almost. So congratulations on that. And that message had really spread. It was a pleasure to talk to you, and maybe you can come back on and talk more about Clean Slate, and we can pull threads even deeper, maybe around pre-order time. What do you think?
That would be a joy, DK. You've just been outstanding to converse with. You're a wonderful conversationalist. And kudos to you for all that you and Morgan have done to elevate people and to help them find their version of resilience.
Well, likewise. And I think, this society, this world is better because of you, and it's better because of us. And we need to do more together in the scientific community and on the front lines. We're out on the front lines every day seeing hundreds of thousands of people, and to bring, one of my goals for Burn as we move forward and as we materialize our vision of transforming and leaving a giant impact on this world is to lean into academia more and more and more, not only from a technical fitness perspective and a physiological viewpoint, but more importantly from a psychological viewpoint, because I've seen it play out, having trained 15,000 camps myself and thousands of people personally, and sitting down with them and almost like armchair behavioral therapy sessions, although I had no idea how to help these people at first. And so I would come talk to the best people I would know to give me something to give back to them. Obviously staying in my lane away from prescription and things like that. So I think it's inevitable that Burn leans in closer to you and your colleagues, and hopefully when the universe wants us to at the right time, there may be something bigger in the works. So we will definitely keep you a close friend of Burn Bootcamp and the Burn podcast, and we'll watch your journey, okay?
Likewise. Stay well. Thank you so much. It's been a delight.
All right, everybody. We're going to do it like we always do. 2 claps on 2, 1, 2. See you guys later. Have a great time. If you'd like to right now, before you jump off, subscribe to Apple Podcasts. It'd mean the world to me and Dr. Chris. Thank you.